Firstly, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we learn and teach, the Wangal people of the Eora Nation. We would also like to pay respect to the custodians of the land on which we live on, the Dharawal people of the Dharawal Nation. We acknowledge their ongoing connection to land, waterways, and community. We also pay respect to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples throughout this nation today. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Orchestrated by the Central Intelligence Agency and Department of Defence under the direction of Edward Lansdale, Operation Mongoose aimed to correct the failures of the US during the Bay of Pigs invasion. The operation specifically aimed to remove Fidel Castro and his communist regime from power in Cuba. The US developed comprehensive contingency plans if Castro had been killed, and there was a considerable presidential interest in this matter.
On the 17th of April, 1961, the US launched an attack to invade Cuba and overthrow the Castro regime, which started off poorly before becoming one of the biggest failures in American, outlining various steps that could be taken going forward and provided arguments for and against some of these ideas. R. Kennedy ends the memorandum by saying, "We had better decide now what we are willing to do to stop it." This sentiment is shared across several of the FRUS documents from the latter half of 1961. Accumulating in the plans for Operation Mongoose. One document which outlines the goals and changes in US foreign policy towards Cuba during this time is Document 304, a program review by Chief of Operations General Edward G. Lansdale. Lansdale presented the operation's six-phase schedule to Attorney General Robert Kennedy on February 20, 1962, as outlined in Document 304. Lansdale begins with an outline of the goal of US policy towards Cuba in early 1962. He states, "The US will help the people of Cuba overthrow the communist regime from within Cuba and institute a new government with which the US can live in peace." By highlighting the need for the United States to be able to live in peace with the new government, Lansdale is able to justify US involvement and actions in Cuba, as well as the need for a six-phase schedule. The outline of the schedule can be seen on the current slide, where I've underlined the proposed timing. The Bay of Pigs invasion was a failure due to the poor planning, but with this report, Lansdale is attempting to make Operation Mongoose more successful by providing clear objectives and a reasonable timeline. To further cement these clear objectives, Lansdale explicitly states, "Will the US respond promptly with military force to aid the Cuban revolt? An early decision is required prior to deep involvement of the Cubans in this program." I believe this is also a result of the failure at the Bay of Pigs, which is supported by Philip Zilko's argument that Kennedy and his people did not want to face the hard choices about US intervention before and during the invasion. Lansdale further explains the need for flexibility in the plan when he says, "Since this is an operation to prompt and support a revolt by the people in a communist police state, flexibility is a must for success." This schedule, in conjunction with the justifications and goals provided, is the result of the United States' failure at the Bay of Pigs invasion and the driving force of maintaining America's stance on communism. President John F. Kennedy received a briefing on the operation's components on March 16, 1962, as described in Document 314, Guidelines for Operation Mongoose. These guidelines continue to reaffirm America's focus on containing communism and maintaining a strong stance against communism. This is evidenced throughout, but in particular by the quote in the blue box. The guidelines, in an effort to be more successful than the Bay of Pigs invasion, also wanted to prioritize re-evaluating after each step taken to ensure the best possible outcome. Therefore, it stated halfway through the document that, at the end of this first period or earlier, if conditions permit, the situation will be reviewed and a decision taken as to the next phase of the program. Although we do not have all of President Kennedy's response or opinion over the guidelines of Operation Mongoose, the footnotes of this document provide us with this quote, which comes from a handwritten covering memorandum by U. Alexis Johnson, dated March 16th. This continued examination of US involvement in Cuba led to the immense detail of Operation Mongoose and its various developments, as evidenced throughout the FRUS documents.
On July 11, 1962, Lansdale presented 5 discussion points regarding Phase 1 of Operation Mongoose. Lansdale appealed for the committee's input regarding Phase 1's objectives, accomplishments, an operational estimate of the potential for intelligence collection, estimate of the potential for military operations within Cuba, and factors worth considering for future operations in Cuba. Document 358, delivered by the DoD Operations Officer for Operation Mongoose, Benjamin T. Harris, to Lansdale on July 23, 1962, reflects on the 5 discussion points presented by Lansdale. In paragraph 5, Harris criticizes Lansdale's consideration to cancel operational plans, treat Cuba as a bloc nation, protect hemisphere from it. He cites that a key disadvantage to this would be an acceptance of a communist bridgehead in the Western Hemisphere and an admission that there was nothing that the United States could or would do about it. This notion is further reinforced in Document 359, delivered by William K. Harvey, a project officer for Operation Mongoose. Would create an increasing level of irresponsible unilateral Cuban actions based in and from the US. Alternatively, both Harris and Harvey recommended US military support for Cubans to overthrow the Castro communist regime through a step-by-step phasing process. As seen in Document 358, Harris explained that this process would furnish new hope and incentives to anti-communist elements inside and outside of Cuba. Harvey expands on this in Document 359, arguing that if this plan were to succeed, there would be an excellent chance of inciting a revolt inside Cuba by late 1963. Operation Mongoose had several things at stake for the US, including substantial economic and military losses. Through examining the preceding documents, we can understand that potentially the biggest stake was America's stance on communism. If US forces followed through on cancelling operational plans in Cuba, as discussed in Documents 358 and 359, this would demonstrate to the rest of the world that the US did not entirely oppose communism. Supplementing this argument, John Callahan writes that America was seen as a defender of stable regimes rather than free governments, more interested in fighting communism and securing investments than in defending liberty. Therefore, the FRUZ documents provide critical insight into the way in which the USA reacted to Cuban foreign issues.